I'm John Strum, and this is RealTalk MS. It's December 28th, and we have a lot to talk about. And as we're in the final days of 2021, I want to take a moment to wish each of you a very happy and a very healthy new year. Today, we're going to revisit my conversation with Dr. Bruce Bebo, the Executive Vice President of Research at the National MS Society. And we're going to be talking about some of the most interesting and important research announcements made during this year's ECTRIMS meeting. ECTRIMS is an acronym for the European Committee for Treatment and Research in Multiple Sclerosis, and their annual meeting is the largest MS research conference in the world. Dr. Bebo is going to brief us about research that's focused on new pathways to stopping MS progression, restoring lost function, and ending MS forever. Just imagine a world where we can prevent MS from even starting. Well, as you're about to hear, the work toward achieving that goal is already underway. This is one of my favorite conversations of the entire year, and you've made it this year's most downloaded and listened to episodes of RealTalk MS. In a moment, Dr. Bruce Bebo will share his review of the ECTRIMS 2021 meeting. The European Committee for Treatment and Research in Multiple Sclerosis, or ECTRIMS, held its annual scientific congress just about 2 weeks ago. ECTRIMS is the largest MS research conference in the world, and following the conference, in what has become an annual tradition, I get to sit down with Dr. Bruce Bebo, the Executive Vice President of Research at the National MS Society, and get his thoughts on the news and announcements that caught his attention during the conference. Like last year, this year's ECTRIMS conference was virtual, but I'm grateful to still have this opportunity to hear about the research that Dr. Bebo found particularly interesting. So as I tend to say every year around this time, welcome back to the podcast, Dr. Bebo.
Hi, John. It's good to be with you. I don't know how many years this is, but it's been a few, and I'm happy to be here with you.
Well, before we get into your key takeaways from this year's conference, I'm hoping you can explain the importance of a conference like ECTRIMS. What is it that makes more than 9,000 scientists and clinicians decide that they need to attend ECTRIMS every year, whether it's in person or virtual?
Yeah, I would say this is arguably one of the most interesting, important, impactful meetings of the year for all of us that are passionate about finding cures for MS. And, even though we were disappointed that we could not meet in person this year, as you mentioned, you might think about this, 9,000 people attending this meeting, John, from 100 different countries. So, we couldn't be in person, but so many more people from so many more places could attend because of the platform. There were 1,700 posters and 200 speakers. I think that's why people come to ECTRIMS, is just the breadth and depth of the science that's being shared. There are lots of meetings during the course of the year. There's nothing like ECTRIMS.
I would 100% concur with that. So let's get to this year's ECTRIMS meeting. What were the presentations or announcements that stood out to you at this year's conference?
Yeah. So let me start by saying, you might remember last year I shared with you and your audience the Society's plan, our plan for accelerating research that is focused on finding cures for MS. And you might remember that we're calling this plan the Pathways to Cures Research Roadmap. And just real quickly, what the roadmap does is it describes the gaps in our knowledge. It describes real discrete milestones and metrics, how we'll measure our progress, and research priorities that are going to speed solutions to and eventually cures for MS. I thought it might be interesting for your audience, John, to know that that the roadmap is finished. It's been submitted for publication in a high-profile journal and will be communicated to the global research community in that venue shortly. And then one more thing before jumping in, I thought you and your audience might be interested. One of the things we were going for with this roadmap was inspiring the global MS research movement to focus on areas of high opportunity that can get us closer to cures for MS. And so the way we went about demonstrating this global consensus was seeking endorsements of the roadmap. And I'm really pleased to report that as of today, we have over 15 global MS patient and professional organizations, including ECTRIMS, which is part of the reason why I'm bringing it up, that have endorsed the roadmap. And I think we see this as a first step, a step towards better coordination and better alignment of the global investment and research that is going to accelerate progress towards cure. And perhaps you'll remember, I know you'll remember, and maybe your reader or listeners will remember that there are three pathways. So we intentionally use the word, the plural of cure. So we're usually cures because there are multiple cures. And we realized during the development of this roadmap that how you defined a cure really was influenced to a large degree about where you were with your journey with MS, but that there were three major cures that people could recognize, and that was stopping MS, restoring, and ending MS through prevention. So I thought, kind of organized my thoughts, John, around what I heard at ECTRIMS around those three pathways, around stop, restore, and end. So I'm going to start with the stop pathway and provide a few examples of advances that we've seen in that, and then maybe we can, if you have questions, we can get to those. So to remind you that the goal of the stop pathway is to halt any new disease activity, and what we mean by activity is no more worsening. No more worsening of daily living, no more worsening of your quality of life, no changes in any kind of disease manifestations. And that's for everyone living with MS. That's what we're going for with STOP. And one of the milestones that's going to tell us that we're getting closer to stopping MS is the development of ever more potent disease-modifying therapies. And that's both for relapsing forms and progressive forms of MS. And not just that, but the knowledge of how we use those treatments in the most effective way possible. So during the meeting this last week, there were numerous, and really too numerous, John had mentioned specifically and individually, but just a lot of presentations on real world experience with the over 20 now disease-modifying therapies we have for MS. And this is knowledge about the long-term effectiveness, the long-term safety. All this knowledge is accumulating, as well as knowledge about how to better know who's going to respond to which medication, and this concept of sort of precision medicine. And this is one of the key objectives in the Pathways to Cures roadmap. So this is important because it's critical that a person with MS get on an effective disease-modifying therapy as soon as possible. And I'd point out that early detection of MS is another objective that we're going for in the roadmap. I'd like to share, one of the targets for the next generation of disease-modifying therapies in MS is called Bruton's tyrosine kinase, and maybe people have heard this term BTK. It's a little quicker to say BTK, and so there are several BTK inhibitors that are in late-stage clinical trials for both relapsing and progressive forms of MS. Now, BTK is a cell signaling molecule. It's expressed in cells that we know contribute to MS, including B cells. And remember, B cells are the target for some of the drugs that we have available for MS, like Ocrevus and rituximab and Kesimpta. But it also seems to be expressed in cells that we think are driving the more smoldering, more insidious damage to the nervous system that's driving the progressive form or progressive phase of MS. And these cells are called microglial cells. And some of the secrets to these cells, to these microglial cells, are being revealed. And some of that was reported at the meeting. So, for example, a team from the Cleveland Clinic looked at a gene activation in microglial cells in MS lesions. And they reported differences in gene expression depending on where in the lesions the cells are located. There's another team of scientists from the University of Massachusetts Medical School that described how an immune mediator called complement can team up with microglia to damage nerve synapses or connections and interrupt brain circuitry in MS. And complement it's becoming a very interesting target, a drug target potentially for progressive MS. And I'll just point out another recent study that was in the very prestigious journal Nature from the NIH recently, also identified complement as a key player in lesions that may be driving progression. And they went on to show that blocking complement could reduce damage in experimental models of MS. And I'm hopeful that we'll see this knowledge translated soon into human clinical trials. And then one more, John, before moving on to the progress I've seen in Restore last week. I want to talk a little bit about Epstein-Barr virus. I know that that's an interest to a lot of people. So targeting Epstein-Barr infected cells is another way we think that could potentially be a novel therapy, actually, for progressive MS. So one study from Dr. Amit Bar-Or, who's at the University of Pennsylvania, reported on behalf of a company called Atara Biotherapeutics, the result of an early phase clinical trial testing the safety and efficacy of an agent that targets and kills EBV infected cells. And what they showed was that treatment with this agent was safe, it was well tolerated, and they actually saw some improvements in functions as well as signals in MRIs that suggested a positive response to treatment. It'd be important to also know that there is an ongoing phase 2 clinical trial that should tell us more about the potential role of EBV infected cells in MS and kind of let us know, kind of tell us that this knowledge can be translated into effective therapy. So I think these studies and others, we don't have time today, John. As I said, there are 1,700 posters at the meeting. I think that gives me hope we're really closer than we ever have been to stopping MS in its tracks.
I couldn't agree more. It's funny that you happen to mention the work that Atara Biotherapeutics is doing. We've sort of followed along with their progress over the last 3 years. And at every ECTRIMS, my listeners get an update from their chief medical officer, AJ Joshi. We're also looking forward to hearing from him about some of the results they reported, some of the surprising results that they reported that even literally surprised their own research team. So yeah, there's good work being done there.
So maybe I'll pivot now, John, to advances that I saw last week in the Restore pathway. And as a reminder, this is the second objective in the Pathways to Cures roadmap. And what we're going for here really is to reverse symptoms and reverse disabilities, not just stopping things, but reversing them. And in order to accomplish this, we're going to need to figure out how to repair tissue damage, especially damage to myelin. And I think there are also opportunities for restoring function by leveraging the nervous system's natural ability to compensate for damage. And we can use this knowledge to achieve functional recovery for people with MS. So there's been, of course, a tremendous increase in our knowledge of the pathways that can be exploited to promote myelin repair. These approaches are both pharmaceutical and cell-based. And both approaches are being explored as ways to promote myelin repair. And some of these strategies are being tested in clinical trials. I know we've talked about this before. So a bit of unfortunate news from the ECTRIMS meeting. An advanced myelin repair program reported negative findings during last week's meeting. This is a drug called opicimab. Some people might know it as anti-lingo. I know we've talked about that before. Of course, this is disappointing. But research isn't a straight line, unfortunately. But I'd say the silver lining here really is this is a really rigorous, well-performed clinical trial, and we will learn maybe as much from this failure as we would of success. And this is going to inform future studies. And I think the hope here and promise is there are a number of other pharmaceutical approaches to repair myelin in the pipeline. And I have hope that it won't be too much longer before we see a success from a pharmaceutical side. Now, on the cell-based therapy side, I'd like to share the outcomes of a study that was led by Dr. Jeffrey Cohen, who I know you know, John, well. And Dr. Cohen reported results from a study of cell-based approach to myelin repair being pursued by a company, again, called Brainstorm Cell Therapeutics. It's a great name, right? Brainstorm. I love that name. But this was a trial of 18 people with progressive MS, and they were treated with mesenchymal stem cells. These are cells that are derived from their own bone marrow, so you avoid any sort of transplant rejection challenge. And before they're transplanted, they're treated in a lab to secrete a cocktail, if you will, of factors that are thought to promote myelin repair and or thought to provide some neuroprotection. So what we learned at the meeting was the treatment was safe, which in these first clinical trials is the primary outcome, that the studies are designed here at this stage to determine safety. So that's positive. And there were also signs of improvement in cognition and vision and mobility. And I'm happy to report that the society supported an add-on study to this. And the study was really to measure levels of biomarkers in the spinal fluid. And we did this through our commercial research program that's called Fast Forward. And the team reported changes in these biomarkers that suggested a shift in the chemical environment of the central nervous system that favors neuroprotection and repair. So there are a number. So this is good news. We'll have to wait for more definitive studies of efficacy, and this along with a number of other studies that are ongoing, exploring cell-based approaches for restorative therapies in MS. I think we'll hear more about those in the coming months and years. I think I probably said this before, John, but the research community is also looking at exercise and rehabilitation as more than just symptomatic therapies, but actually thinking, and I'm quoting this from one of the talks I heard, thinking of this as medicine. And so I share one study from Denmark that reported last week that showed that an exercise program could have neuroprotective effects on certain regions of the brain. And then another study from Spain reported that a 5-week cognitive rehabilitation program could improve the connectiveness of neural networks in the brain, creating an environment that helps the brain compensate or rewire for damage caused by MS. And because cognitive impairment is a frequent challenge for people with MS, especially people with more advanced MS, this and other research on this topic that was reported last week at the ECTRIMS meeting gives me hope, gives everyone hope, that there are going to be ways that we can slow down or even reverse this potentially disabling consequence of MS. And that's what I've got, John, for Restore. Of course, again, a lot more we could talk about. And maybe this is a good opportunity to share. And I perhaps in your meeting notes, you'll share the link to the website where, all the abstracts for this meeting are publicly available. So there's a link that people can go look at these themselves if they're interested in looking at them.
We will definitely have that link in today's show notes. The updates on exercise as medicine. And I have to say, coming out of that presentation, even though this is a virtual conference, I heard that phrase repeated over and over again.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Because it was so startling and such startlingly good news as people anxiously, hopefully await the next pharmacological treatment. There are things that each individual can actually do for themselves starting today and do themselves some good, not just feeling good because they had a workout, but really do themselves some good by integrating exercise and lifestyle activity into their everyday. It's really a great step forward.
I couldn't agree more. I think, an individual living with MS, there's a fair amount that you can take control of and do to help mitigate and slow down the progression of MS, including exercise, including diet, including rehabilitation, and coupled with the pharmaceuticals, if that's appropriate. I think that's a tremendous message for people to hear. So are you ready to move on to the last pathway, John, the end pathway?
Let's do that.
All right. So the third objective, the final objective of Pathways to Cure is to end MS. And we're defining ending MS here by preventing new cases of disease. And you heard me, right, I said prevention. So it's becoming more, appreciated that MS has an at-risk period, even an at-risk period prior to clinical onset of disease. And we know that the time from exposure to, let's say, a risk factor or risk factors and the onset of disease is years to decades, right? This is a window of opportunity that we have to either significantly delay the onset of MS or perhaps even prevent it from happening in the first place. So there were ECTRIMS presenters that touched on efforts to map out the genetic and lifestyle and environmental factors that contribute to the risk of developing MS. And this knowledge will enable earlier intervention and may eventually, as I said, lead to prevention. So I know we've talked about biomarkers before, John, and how they could be used to identify people potentially at high risk for MS. And there was a lot of progress being made on biomarkers. And the most advanced candidate biomarker, and probably a lot of your listeners have heard of this already, is called neurofilament light chain. And the acronym is NFL, which is sort of ironic. But this is a structural protein. It helps create the structure of nerve fibers or axons. And when nerve fibers get damaged, this protein gets released. And it can be measured both in the spinal fluid and now in the blood. And it's not specific for MS. It's just telling you that there's been some kind of damage to your nervous system. But this could be used along with other tests to identify people that are at risk for MS. And also it could potentially be used to monitor progression of disease or even monitor response to therapies. So, and again, NFL is a hot topic right now. There's been a lot of attention, and rightfully so, on this particular biomarker. There are other emerging biomarkers that could also help predict who might be at high risk for MS. And in a very elegant talk by Charlotte Tunisian from the Amsterdam University in the Netherlands, she talked about some additional promising biomarkers, including a protein called CNTN1. That's even harder to remember than NFL. NFL is a lot easier than that. CNTN1, this is a marker for damage to nerve fibers, also like NFL. And another one called GFAP, which is made by brain cells called astrocytes that are also thought to play an important role in MS. And I think having more than one biomarker would be a huge advantage that delivers more specificity, right, and more sensitivity for detecting MS in its earliest stages. And so this gives me even more hope that we'll eventually be able to treat people at high risk for MS and significantly delay or maybe even present the onset of disease. Again, we talked about Epstein-Barr already as a therapeutic, but this work's inspired by the observation that there's an association between Epstein-Barr infection and the risk for MS, and really trying to understand whether it's simply, John, an association or actually a causal factor in MS is still an open question. But I think we're getting a little bit. The evidence really is building that it's causal. And so I'll touch on a study from Harvard that was trying to get at this question of whether EBV infection also, whether it occurs before the symptoms of MS or before sort of, or is it part of kind of a hidden MS onset? So if EBV is the cause of MS, the infection should come before the first sign of nervous system damage, right? So the team, we're talking about EBV and NFL. So the team looked for EBV antibodies in a series of stored blood samples from military personnel who then went on later to develop MS, and compared those levels to those who, to individuals that did not go on to develop MS. And then they also looked at the concentration of NFL, again, a non-specific marker of brain damage. And what they wanted to see was whether the NFL levels were they elevated before the antibodies appeared for EBV, or did NFL come up after the first signs of EBV infection? So they found that there were no signs of nerve damage before the primary EBV infection in individuals who went on to develop MS later. So that is consistent that, again, it's not absolute proof yet, but it's certainly consistent with the idea that EBV is a trigger rather than a consequence of MS. And I think it'd be important to share that there is progress being made on vaccines for EBV. There are a lot of reasons to invest and want to have a vaccine for Epstein-Barr virus. And so there is progress being made in the development of vaccines for EBV. And the only way we're going to prove for sure causality is to have a vaccine and vaccinate a lot of people at risk for MS and monitor them for the development of MS. So we're working towards a day where we'll have an EBV vaccine and can test that causality. But until then, I'm encouraged by the progress that we've made, that is being made in identifying risk factors and strategy for mitigating that risk in MS, and that could lead us to prevention of disease. And John, I thought maybe your listeners, and you let me know if you think this is appropriate or not. I know, obviously, we can't escape the COVID pandemic. This is also was a hot, if you will, area of research with a lot of reports at the meeting. Do you think you and your listeners would be interested in, I think I know the answer to this, but would you be interested in hearing a little bit more about what we know about COVID and MS and vaccination?
Yeah, that was going to be my first follow-up question. So please feel free to tell us about that.
Sure. We've been doing this long enough. We're finishing each other's sentences. Maybe,
pretty much.
All right. So, of course, this is an important topic, a topic that was discussed in great length at ECTRIMS, and particularly the effectiveness and the safety of vaccines, and as well as the impacts of the effect, of different disease-modifying therapies on vaccine effectiveness. I think there were over 100 presentations out of the 1,700 abstracts. 100 of them were just on COVID. So that gives you a sense of how much work's going into that. So there were results shared from an ongoing global data sharing initiative. This is being led by the MS International Federation to combine results from around the world. And that includes an effort that we're leading along with the Canadian MS Society and the Consortium of MS Centers, where we've collected just in North America almost 4,000 cases of COVID in people with MS. And that data is being combined with other national efforts to collect data. And those results have really contributed and helped to refine our guidance on COVID and on COVID vaccination in MS. So I'd like to point you and your listeners to some of the society web pages. John, I know you're familiar with them, that provide the most up-to-date guidance. So I would encourage, and I expect that you would have in your show notes the link to that guidance on the vaccination for people with MS, because it's so critically important. And here's what we know in a nutshell, that the science has shown us that the vaccines are safe and they're effective, particularly at preventing serious outcomes of COVID infection. And that people with MS, particularly people with MS that are in a high-risk group, so people that have other medical condition on top of their MS, let's say someone has diabetes or high blood pressure or cardiovascular disease or asthma or a pulmonary issue, anybody that's got another medical condition layered on top of their MS, or somebody with more advanced disease that's more disabled, those people are at higher risk for poor outcomes with COVID infection. And everyone should get vaccinated. But particularly if you're in one of these high-risk categories, you should prioritize getting vaccinated if you haven't already. Regarding disease-modifying therapies, overall, the data is telling us that vaccines are safe to use with MS disease-modifying therapies. But we are learning that some disease-modifying therapies may make vaccination less effective. So those therapies, including Ocrevus, Rituxan, Kesimpta, and Lemtrada, may make getting your response to the vaccine less than it might otherwise be. That's not a reason to not get vaccinated. There's still likely protection you're getting from the vaccine. But I would recommend, and this is in the guidance, that you talk to your healthcare provider about possibly timing your vaccine, timing your third dose or booster dose, perhaps timing this with your treatment in a way that mitigates or minimizes the impact of the disease-modifying therapy as much as possible. So that's in the guidance, and I would recommend people talk to their healthcare provider about that. And finally, there was evidence that is accumulating, and some of this was presented during the meeting last week, that is showing that there is little to no risk that vaccination induces an MS risk, an attack or an exacerbation. So up to now, the data is overwhelmingly in favor of getting vaccinated. And again, I would point the listeners to the guidance. We have recruited the world's authority in MS, in virology and vaccination that are informing this guidance. It is updated on a regular basis with the most up-to-date information as our understanding and knowledge about third doses and boosters and safety and efficacy of vaccines is, as we learn more, that guidance is constantly updated. So I highly recommend people look to there if they're still having questions about being vaccinated. You can tell how passionate I am about that topic. I will, John, I mean, this is a little, at being a leader in this North American effort, I see all the cases every day. I get an email and I see when someone dies of COVID with MS, and too many people have died of COVID with MS. And so that's part of the reason why I'm so passionate about people getting vaccinated.
Thank you for communicating that as passionately as you have. I have had the links to the MS Society's guidance ever since that guidance was published. They've been part of the show notes, and they're not coming down until I know everyone has been vaccinated. I know how hard it is. People are, burned out on the pandemic. They're tired of virtual conferences, and we all want to be face to face and as often as possible. And we're just going to get there faster when everybody is vaccinated. So I just concur with everything you said. You've shared some amazing information about the future, but this is our opportunity to determine our future by getting that vaccination. I hope everybody listens to what you had to share.
Well, that's it, John. I hope what I've been able to sort of communicate is, even though the pandemic has created some challenges, that we and just so much credit to all of the scientists around the world for focusing, despite all of the really distraction of the pandemic, personally and professionally, to keep fighting this fight and getting us closer to finding cures for MS. I hope people will hear this and feel like good progress is being made on multiple fronts, and that we're closer than we ever have been before to finding cures for MS.
Well, Dr. Bruce Bebo, it is always great getting your perspective on what has become an annual tradition now. So I'm looking forward to doing this again next year, and I am holding out hope that we're going to have that conversation face to face in Amsterdam at the end of ECTRIMS 2022.
Me too, John.
That's going to wrap up this episode of Real Talk MS. Real Talk MS is powered by the National MS Society. And you can share this episode of the podcast by letting your friends or family members know that all they have to do is point their web browser at realtalkms.com/226. You'll find that link in today's show notes, so you can easily copy and paste it right into an email or a text. And if you find yourself with some extra free time this week, you might want to catch up on your Real Talk MS listening. And the easiest way to do that is through the free Real Talk MS app for your iOS or Android smartphone or tablet. It's the best way for us to stay connected. So if you haven't yet gotten around to it, please visit the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store and download the Real Talk MS app. The app will automatically download the latest episode of Real Talk MS. You'll be able to access any of our past episodes. You'll be able to save your favorite episodes, and it's a great way for me to share bonus content with you. So I hope you'll take a moment and download the app today. I'm John Strum. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, and we'll see you next week in 2022.